Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before you begin, we must do this. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Tang.
Thank you.
Tam. Gong Xi Fa Cai. Happy New Year. It's the year of the rooster, and it's a very auspicious time. I'm here today to talk about Chinese martial arts, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And I found it very interesting, if anybody saw yesterday's New York Times, that there was an article on Shaolin Kung Fu in yesterday's New York Times, which I'd like to address. First of all, I'd like to ask different people here, what do you think of martial arts? What is martial arts to you? Are there any practitioners here of martial arts? Okay. What styles? Okay. Okay, and Shotokan, okay. Japanese system, yeah, good. And how about yourself?
Like little baby practitioner.
Uh-huh.
And Shaolin style is the usual Shaolin also.
Shaolin, okay, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, wonderful. So we have two martial artists here who are studying the martial arts. And how about who else? Who else is out here? Yes?
Yang style,
Tai Chi, okay. Aikido, Japanese system based on throws, yeshiba. O-sensei developed that, yeah, and it's a wonderful system of martial arts from Japan, which has very close philosophical theories that were similar to Tai Chi, so these are very interesting. And who else? Okay, so we have, yeah, okay, your dad's there, but he's shy and reserved, okay. So we have some martial artists here, so I'll be talking, thank you very much. I will be talking a bit about the different aspects of the martial arts. One of the interesting things right now is that martial arts, especially Chinese martial arts, is part of the global culture. Okay? Many, many years ago, the tradition of the martial arts, it was secret. And it was practiced in secrecy by monks, in particular Buddhist monks, also Taoist priests. It was taught in secret by warriors and also by criminals. All these different aspects. We're going to address this. But the important thing is, traditionally, the martial arts was secret. I remember when I was young, many years ago, I wanted to study Chinese Kung Fu. And at that particular point, it was secret. And it was being taught in secret societies in Chinatown. And my father did not want me to join. But we'll go into this a little bit later. But what I found fascinating is that an art that 30 years ago, actually about 1963, Chinese martial arts, or what we'll call Kung Fu, was forbidden to be taught to outsiders. It was a secret art. And I was a young kid watching Bruce Lee, watching the Hong Kong Kung Fu movies, watching David Carradine on TV. Some of you people are familiar with these old TV shows. And my passion was to learn Chinese martial arts, but the problem was it was all secret. So I had to study the next best thing, so I started studying karate, judo, which were these martial arts from Japan, which had become very famous at that particular point. But when it came to Chinese Kung Fu, I couldn't study because it was secret. Over time, I was able to penetrate into the martial art world and study it and see over the past 30 years how the martial arts developed. What was once something that was so secret right now is part of the world culture. When we think of the movies right now, what do you see? What movies has anybody seen in martial arts? Hero, okay. Hero, what else? I'm sorry? Around the World in 80 Days, right. Very interesting comment. Around the World in 80 Days, a Western movie now has Kung Fu. As I said, Kung Fu is part of the world culture. What was once secret 35, 40 years ago, way back, is now part of the world culture. What does that mean? If we examine Chinese history, Chinese culture, we know the culture goes back 5,000 years more. And China is one of these longest continuous civilizations that have been around. It's been around many years. So therefore, when it comes to knowledge and contributions, cultural contributions, we have literature, poetry, art, painting, cuisine, food, many, many areas the Chinese mind has contributed to human knowledge. It's also interesting that in the realm of combat, this Chinese mind had also developed and put its own unique stamp on something that was considered at that point something very low, a low expression of the human being. The urge to violence and the urge to inflict pain on others. And yet, they took this urge to defend oneself that would go into reach levels where we would inflict harm on another individual and kill. And they took this urge that is part of the human psyche, and they developed an art, a science, a spiritual path that in the end expresses the highest aspirations of a human being, reaching for high spiritual enlightenment. So this is what I'd like to address today, this journey of the martial arts, how it transformed, a little bit about martial arts yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Now, I'd like to read just a moment yesterday's New York Times. It says, "So many paths. Which Shaolin is real?" The reply, yes. And this article is written from Dongfeng, China, which is in the Henan province in central China. Now, the Henan province is the birthplace of Shaolin Kung Fu. And people, who knows about the Shaolin, so I won't have to go too far into that. Shaolin Kung Fu. Shaolin Kung Fu is one of the major schools of Chinese martial arts, and it's probably one of the most famous because of films. This article is saying, well-worn flagstones lead up a gentle gradient through an imposing gate, past huge statues of fierce guardian spirits. The tiled eaves of a temple loom behind a giant ginkgo tree, all but groaning under the weight of a heavy snow. Suddenly, the pounding of hammers and the whine of electric saw interrupt the reverie. Only then does it dawn that this is no ancient temple, but a recreation. The impression is confirmed by a glance at the colors in the rafters, impossibly bright for anything truly old. Like any temple, the birthplace of China's most famous form of Kung Fu is supposed to be a space of tranquility and meditation. Yet Shaolin has become such a fixture of Chinese popular culture that much of the life of this holy shrine involves greeting paying tourists who arrive year-round by the thousands. So this article basically talks about this basic dichotomy that's occurring when we talk about the Shaolin. And I don't know if any, have you gone back to Shaolin temples? Many martial artists go back, pay homage, and return to the Shaolin temple. It's sort of like going back to Mecca. And many of them are very disappointed because they go to the Shaolin temple and they suddenly found that they're basically coming to Disneyland. And that basically it is probably one of China's most popular tourist sites. So what happened to this sacred temple where the martial arts developed 1,500 years ago? What happened to it? Why is it now just a Chinese Disneyland? This is the temple, historically, where not only was Shaolin Kung Fu developed, but it was also where Zen Buddhism, or Chan in Chinese, was developed. And yet today we go back and suddenly you're just being accosted by buying trinkets, souvenirs, and watching these demonstrations. This article is addressing that. And these are things that I had witnessed myself when I went back in 1984. I was one of the first Westerners who was invited to go back to the Shaolin Temple. And at that point, it had just opened up. And it was a very wonderful experience, but it was very enlightening in that what I had romanticized the Shaolin Temple to be and what it really was something very different. So this article is addressing that, and it's actually saying it is both. That right now the Shaolin is an attempt to promote Buddhism, especially Chan or Zen Buddhism, promote Shaolin Kung Fu, but also they also realize it's a big money maker. And I want to address this because it seems, again, that dichotomy here. Because all of what we're talking about in martial arts really deals with dichotomy. It deals with the yin and yang. You see, you're dealing with an art of destruction, a science of destruction, and then an art to liberate the human mind and to enlighten one. It seemed like a contradiction. Okay. Now, as I said, because of the movies, because of Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and now there's a new person coming out, and because of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, what is it? Hidden Dragon, Crouching Tiger? House of Flying Dagger. We have all these films that suddenly, after 30 years of being recognized by mainstream America. 40 years ago, I'd be going up to porno theaters in Boston, Chinatown, where they would rent out the space 10 o'clock at night. After the porno movie was over, they would show Kung Fu movies twice a week. That's how I started to see these Kung Fu movies from Hong Kong. Right now, you go on 42nd Street, you go anywhere, and they're showing these movies. So I've watched how the martial arts has been originally this arcane art practiced by nuts and fanatics, and how right now it's blossomed, and you see it now even in the New York Times. So today, we can honestly say that Chinese Kung Fu is more popular or more known than it ever was in all of history because of the media. Sometimes when I go around, I ask people, when you think of Chinese culture, what is the one cultural product that everybody knows about all around the world? So people would think, well, how about Tang poetry, or Song painting, or some of these philosophers. But if you really think about it, even Chinese cuisine, Chinese food, anywhere you go in the world, people know the word Kung Fu, and they know the name Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. And some people, this happened years ago when a friend of mine, he was in the Middle East, and he said he was in the village, and some kid jumped out and went, "Ha! Bruce Lee!" And then he realized that these people, some of them who don't have the education, don't read about Chinese culture, they were going to see these films on Chinese Kung Fu that was coming out of Hong Kong and being pumped out. So I find it interesting, really, that actually it's possible and it's arguable that Chinese Kung Fu is the #1 Chinese cultural product that everyone is going to recognize. Okay? So today, while Chinese Kung Fu is so well known, it's very ironic that the meaning of Chinese martial arts is not truly known, and that it's distorted. And these are some things that I'd like to examine. That contradiction of why it's distorted. One of the reasons, obviously, is, again, films. While people go to the films and they enjoy the action and they enjoy the mystique of these warrior monks, these martial artists who are able to do things with their bodies, supernatural things, demonstrating tremendous power, and also connected to some mystical secret teachings of the Buddhist monks and the Taoists, this is all very intriguing. And yet, the true art is not understood fully. And even in China, it's not understood. So, I'd like to go back and talk a little bit about Kung Fu yesterday. Because of the time considerations, I won't be able to go too much into the history. So let's go back to the Shaolin Temple, which is the birthplace of Shaolin Kung Fu, one of the most famous styles of Chinese martial arts, which has influenced all the other martial arts, was taught there. In 527 AD, there was a monk named Bodhidharma, or Damo, according to legend. He was an Indian monk who was traveling from India to go to China. His reason for doing that was that he felt that the Buddhism that was being transmitted to China at that time had been corrupt and had been distorted. And he wanted to bring what he felt was the original message of Buddha to China. And according to legend, he had an interview with the Emperor Liang Wudi of the Liang dynasty, who was a Buddhist convert, and he was putting a lot of money into developing temples and promoting Buddhism. And he saw this famous wise man come to him, and he says, well, you know, I've done all this. What karmic credit do I get? Am I going to get to go to heaven because I'm spending all this money promoting Buddhism? And Bodhidharma answered him, he just said, Wu, which means negative or nothing. And he was very abrupt with the emperor, and he sort of just left because he realized that the emperor's understanding of Buddhism was not what Buddhism was really all about. Here he was thinking about doing good deeds and just doing these things so he could be reborn in paradise, rather than really going to the real essence of Buddhism, which is to discover your true self, to break the illusions of life around us by going deep, deep into oneself to discover what we really are beyond our ego. So he traveled up and went to the Song Mountains in central China. This is the Shaolin Temple. And he began teaching there. And they said that he went to a cave and he meditated for 9 years. And his powers that he developed while meditating were so powerful that he could hear the ants scream. During this time, he began to teach the monks to meditate. But he found that they couldn't sit and meditate. They were falling asleep and they were weak. So according to legend, he developed these exercises, these 3 groups of exercises: the muscle-changing classic, the bone-washing classic, and also 18 Lawhorn boxing. These 3 sets of exercises that have been attributed to this historical figure. And it was from these exercises that martial arts, Shaolin Kung Fu, developed. Now, in ancient China, very often the monks would travel on pilgrimages, and they would go from village to village. And in these villages, very often they would have religious objects, they would have food, and they were attacked by bandits. So according to the story, these monks took their understanding of the mind, the body, and the spirit, and found ways that they could defend themselves. And this was the birth of what we call Shaolin Kung Fu. Now, if you go to Chinese martial arts schools, and they will always know Bodhidharma or Dharma. Some of you see the statues, he's got bushy eyebrows and he's very fierce. And they always say, who is this? This is the father of Shaolin Kung Fu. Interestingly enough, if you go to Buddhists and say, who is this individual? They'll say, he is the father of Chan, or Zen Buddhism. Now this is very interesting. You have the same person who is to be considered the founder of a science of destruction. And to the Buddhists, he is the founder of an art or way to enlightenment, to personal liberation. This seems to be a contradiction. And this is the contradiction that I'm addressing today. Right? Is it martial arts about combat? Or is it about spiritual enlightenment? You see? These are some questions we'll continue to ask. Now, at the Shaolin Temple, according again to the Shaolin tradition, the monks became very famous for their abilities in combat. And what distinguishes Chinese martial arts, basically, what is Chinese martial arts? Okay, it's basically, as we understand it, unarmed or armed combat using the human body. So very basically, there's 5 ways in terms of Kung Fu. It's the way of the fist, how to defend yourself using the fist. Okay, so much for this. There's also the way of kicking. Kicking, okay? So they use not just the fist, but they also use the feet to fight. They also develop ways in which they use joint locks to defend themselves. So they would twist arms, break the shoulders, get people in chokes, throw people. They also develop ways of using the body like an animal. And this is what distinguishes Kung Fu from many of the other arts. Think of a monk meditating in the grass. He suddenly hears something, and he looks over, and then suddenly he might see a snake fighting an animal. There's one story how a monk watched the movements of a crane attacking, a crane defending itself against an ape. And the monk immediately thought because the ape was stronger, it would defeat the crane. But the crane was able to use its wings to harass the stronger opponent. It was able to move back and forth so that finally it used its crane beak to strike the eye of the ape. The ape let go and it ran away. Okay? So there's many stories of how these forms and systems of combat develop observing nature. Okay? I'll just move a little bit.
I got
sorry?
another mic, so
Okay, I'll just
down.
move. Okay. Now, obviously, many of us who are familiar with combat in the West know that people box and they can kickbox. But what distinguishes Kung Fu is, again, the animal movements. So if you've ever seen a tiger or a cat playing with spool of thread, you would watch the cat use its claws like this. And they would develop movements that they call like the tiger claw, in which you use the hands like the claw of a tiger. Perhaps another monk somewhere else was meditating, and maybe he was skinnier, maybe he was smaller, and he said, gee, you know, tiger's for strength, but I'm only 120 pounds, and Bruno Wong is 250 pounds. Now, I could be a very powerful tiger, but if Bruno and I fight, it's mass against mass, I'm going to put my money on Bruno. So what did he do? He went back to nature. He observed nature. And maybe one day he saw a snake moving. And he realized, wait a second, the snake's weak, but it's using speed and deception to defend itself. So he said, well, maybe I'm going to study these movements of how a snake moves to learn to defend myself. Maybe there was another monk, and he saw a crane, and he realized that this crane is using its hand like a beak, its head like a beak to strike. And it also uses the wrist to strike. Back here, the head of the crane. And then also the wings of the crane. So he developed another style of fighting. See? So now, if someone's very powerful and they're coming in and striking, instead of him blocking hard and striking back, he can move, sidestep, and strike the person's eyes with his fingertips. So here, he was using softness to overcome hardness. And this is the genius. This is the genius of Chinese martial arts. Because they studied nature, they studied the way energy moves, the way nature operates in cycles. And they studied this and they applied this to combat. This is an aspect of the art that's lost. In other words, when you see these movies, very often you see people going into various postures. And they're very pretty. Many people say they're very pretty, but they can't fight. So in Chinese, they have a term, 花拳绣腿, which means flowery hands, embroidered feet. And this is used to criticize the martial artists who look very beautiful and elegant when they move, but when it comes to kicking butt, they can't do it. And this is quite prevalent. This is a problem here. The martial arts, as I said, developed because you had men, very deep thinkers, who didn't just understand the body, they also understood the mind. They understood the heart. So martial arts in its true form was developed by warrior monks. Men who understood that we're spiritual animals and that there are times you have to use strength. You have to solve the problem with power. And there's other times when you could solve the problem with softness, with diplomacy. And what they were teaching was not just to be tough and powerful, but also to be sensitive and aware. The training of a martial artist in its true form is to develop a whole, complete human being who has access to his or her masculine side. You got to go forward and you have to solve the problem like this, you can do it. And then also, not always to solve the problem like this, but sometimes to solve the problem like this. I remember when, who's familiar with Tai Chi? Very slow motion, moving exercises. Years ago, they were explaining that Tai Chi was an art based on yielding. And some guy in the audience cracked. We have that in the West. It's called yes dear. All right. Now, in the Shaolin martial arts, as I said, there's many, many different systems. But the basic question that we really want to ask, what does these combat arts have to do with meditation? What does it have to do with the spirit? So I tell you, there's a story. It's the journey of the martial artist. The young boy goes to the master, and he says, I want to learn how to fight. I want to learn how to be a man. So the monk says, fine. But first, you have to bow to me. You have to show respect. He goes, bow. We have knowledge. This knowledge has taken years, centuries to develop. It has to be respected. So now, not just bow to me. Now I'm going to teach you how to be the most scientific fighter. You'll be deadly. But first you have to show me 50 push-ups on your knuckles. Oh, you can't do 50 push-ups on your knuckles? Oh, sorry, I can't teach you that yet. Practice your 50 push-ups. Or practice your horse stance. Stay like this for 15 minutes and breathe. Okay. Then over time, this student's standing there, his legs are shaking, and he's enduring it. He said, hey, kid, life is painful. Life is about suffering. Shut up, get back down there. You want to learn how to fight? I'm going to teach you. So he takes this person through a disciplined process to develop themselves physically and to prepare themselves for combat, life and death. So eventually, he could practice as hard. He finds out, hey! He could destroy these bricks and boards. He could kick. He can fight these people around him. And he says, it's fine, but you still don't understand it yet. Before I teach you the next stage, you have to start to meditate. So now, the boy starts to sit and meditate to quiet his mind. And where once, hey! 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 He was just doing these things for his body, counting and forcing himself to push beyond his limit, to strengthen himself physically. Now he has to sit here and count breaths and not move. This is the part of the Shaolin training that's been lost. This is very serious as far as I'm concerned, because it's teaching one half of the art. Bruce Lee, who is responsible, if there's one person, he is the man responsible for making Chinese Kung Fu and martial arts famous worldwide. He's a legend. He was my idol when I was young. I aspired to be like him. And he was brilliant, revolutionary thinker, talented martial artist. But he died at 32. He died at 32. As a young man, I could try to aspire to be like that. But then I lived on to be 40. Then I lived on to be 50. Now I'm 56. And I look back and I see, wait a second. I can't follow this man's path. He can't lead me anymore because he died at 32. There's many theories on why Bruce Lee died. I'm not going to get into it, but my personal opinion after much research was he basically killed himself trying to become perfect. In his quest for perfection and power, he lost control. He developed the power. He developed that power, but just keep on doing that over and over again. What's it doing to you inside? You see? He died of a swelling in the brain. And if people like me who are fanatics really read how this guy trained, what he was doing with his life, it was actually excess. Now this is just a theory, and I'm not here because he's my hero and he's the guy who made it all happen. But I'm trying to introduce the fact that at 32, no matter how brilliant he was, his understanding of the martial arts and portrayal of Chinese Kung Fu is that of a very talented, brilliant, young martial arts master, but he's only 32. And if you study traditional martial arts history, the arts go on to when you're 50, 60, 70, and 80, and it changes. You see, he didn't meditate. He didn't meditate. He took this part of the art and made it, well, if this is good, I'm going to do, instead of 100 push-ups, I'm going to do 200 push-ups. You see? Instead of doing this, I'm going to do more. So he had this tremendous will and desire so that he could push his body beyond limits, and he did wonderful things. But the chain is as strong as the weakest link. And there was one part of his body that couldn't take that pressure, and boop! See? Now the traditional ways of the art, the monks would take you to that next stage through meditation. You see? But the arts as they're being taught today have lost that part of it. See? So this is something I'd just like to comment about the Shaolin tradition, that it combines the warrior and the monk together. Does anybody have any questions as I go on? Anybody have any questions? Yes.
You said briefly, another theory was he got hit.
I'm sorry?
Another theory on Bruce Lee's death was
Mhm.
because he got hit by all the kung fu experts, right?
Yeah.
Like he got,
Shaolin
some
The death touch,
Yeah.
all that secret. This is a theory. It's a popular theory. It's very romantic. I personally don't believe it. If you want, there's a tape called I believe, The Mysterious Death of Bruce Lee. They interview the doctors who performed the autopsy on him, and they will explain from a medical point of view what happened. It's not a popular tape because people want to believe otherwise. Okay? But thank you. Yes, there are some people who believe that he was killed by other martial artists because he was revealing the secrets of Kung Fu. That is a theory. Are there any other questions?
In my own studies, I have found that most of the teachers of today,
Mm-hmm.
whilst they are told that martial arts is about the mind, body, and spirit, very often they are not taught how
Mm-hmm.
to achieve that.
Yes.
All right. I've been fortunate that I have had a teacher who really understood that,
Wonderful.
and he learned from Professor Moses Powell. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
He just passed away.
Yes.
I'm very sad. And I know many of his students.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, how we can try to achieve that, the actual how.
The how, okay. Usually that would be done in a workshop. So and for martial artists, it would be a little bit different here. So I could just try to explain something that in my own journey as a martial artist, when the light bulb went off and some of these enlightenments or insights I had. One insight I had was when I took yoga for the first time. I don't know if any of you have done yoga. Yoga obviously is this mind, body, spirit art from India. But if we look at it, Bodhidharma came from India. So there has to be some sort of correlation that many martial artists are not familiar with. This is what I'd like to address. Now, for example, I'll use Bruce Lee as an example. Bruce Lee, as I said, was the person who made martial arts famous. Okay? But as a martial artist, he was a revolutionary because he was against traditional martial arts. He felt that practicing the forms and practicing these prearranged movements that I was doing was, he said, swimming on dry land. He just said, you don't fight that way. And just standing and punching here, or hitting here, moving like this over and over again was not realistic. And he actually said, if they practiced basketball like they practiced Kung Fu, they would be outside of the court shooting imaginary balls for 6 months before anybody got on court. So he was critical of the traditional training methods. One, he also rejected what we call forms, which are prearranged movements. This is prearranged movements based on Tiger. He had rejected that. He's saying in combat, it's alive, it's changing, it's chaotic. You can't practice these prearranged forms. So he rejected that. He also rejected the notion of qi, which is the vital force, the life force that people use to fight. He rejected that. What he did, and what his contribution to the arts, in my opinion, aside from promoting it and becoming this cultural icon, was that he brought the arts back to the reality of practical combat. Because what had happened was people were starting to become flowery hands and broader feet. They were doing the forms, doing the movements, and they forgot the real practical application. So Bruce Lee, who was originally born in America, went to Hong Kong, came back. He said, wait a second, if I have to do combat and defend myself here, I have to develop different ways. And so he began to train like a modern athlete. He worked out with weights, he ran, he jumped rope. So there's this new movement towards what is called modern martial arts, which Bruce Lee sort of was one of the leaders of. And as a young man, he was my hero, so I followed his way. But I also was fascinated by the traditional movements, so I also practiced forms. At a particular point in my development, after I realized that I could fight, that I could kill, that I had the confidence, I knew every fiber of my being, that if I had to defend myself, just like that, I would do what I had to do. And after that, I said, let's go back and look at this fancy stuff and see if there's anything behind it. And I went to explore the traditional forms and methods. And I found that everything that Bruce Lee was teaching was found hidden in the forms. Everything was there, but it was hidden. The reason was these were secret arts. These were secret arts, and the teachers wanted to keep the higher knowledge secret. Many of these secrets are still here. And many people who think the secrets of martial arts really deal with fighting don't really understand its true context. The real secrets of martial arts is how to defend yourself in life, not just against the opponent. Okay.
We will say, like, for Bruce Lee to disregard the old Chinese tradition of fighting, because all that old tradition kept China at a, it protected them, like you said, defense. All the styles, all that's for defense. That's what, that's what Bruce Lee probably see that when he said, fight, beat people up, but it's not about being cocky and beating people up. It's about just being humble, and somebody come and want to beat you for being humble, you can defend yourself with the tiger.
That's right. It's a self-defense. It is self-defense. Okay. Now, again, let me repeat what I was talking about before, because, as I said, it's a journey as a martial artist, because the young boy, obviously when you're young, you want to be the captain of the football team or be able to take the captain of the football team, and you want the cheerleaders. Basic, if you look at nature shows, the male animals fight for the female animals. It's basic, it's wired into us. So this sexual energy, the libido, the aggressive energy, it is just part of us being human. And this is the so-called lower parts of the human being. But again, the warrior monks were concerned not with just developing this, they wanted to transcend the lower, to cultivate themselves, to penetrate to the higher part. So they had this concept of, in Chinese philosophy, called sanhe, sancai, which is heaven, tian, that's di. My Chinese isn't that good, and ren. And basically, this philosophy says, above us is heaven or the sky, and we get energy from above us. Below us, that's the earth. That's the material plane. In between is the human being. The human being, Ren, has reason. And he is, or he or she is, a bridge between heaven and earth. When heaven, earth, and the human being are out of line, we have chaos, confusion, and conflict. But when heaven, earth, and the human being are balanced, we have peace, harmony, and power. This is called the concept of Sansai, heaven, earth, and man. And this concept, philosophical concept, permeates all the martial arts. And it permeates all of Chinese thought. Okay? So, in a modern Western term, heaven here is spirit, earth is body or the material plane, and the human being is mind. Okay, so it's mind, body, spirit, using the Western term. The human being has a mind, we have an intellect, we have reason, we can think, we can calculate things. But also, just like an animal, we come from the earth, we have a material body. We have to eat. We have to make love, perpetuate. We have to shit. That's an animal. We share that with animals. So that's earth. And yet, we also have higher aspirations. We have ideals. Wouldn't it be nice if there was world peace, if there was harmony? So a human being has these three components. We all have that in us. This is the philosophy behind it. And the purpose of these mind-body disciplines is to bring these three in harmony and to align them. And martial arts is a dramatic demonstration that an ordinary person can unleash extraordinary power when they know how to bring their mind, body, and spirit in sync. And that's all it is. It's taking who we are and developing ourselves in these three areas, and then learning how to use these energies. And by doing that, learning how to flow with situations, we can find this peace and harmony. Okay? So, how did martial arts do that in the form? How did it do that? In Chinese philosophy, there's this book called the I Ching. It's the oldest book of philosophy. All of Chinese culture is based on I Ching. I Ching, it means the book of changes. The basic theory is the only thing out here is change. What we see in front of us every moment is just energy changing, transforming. But it's transforming at different rates. So this book of philosophy says that change is universal, but no matter what the change, it has to follow 64 phases, 64 stages of change. Okay? And when you understand how this change operates in our life and you learn how to adapt to it, you're going to best survive. Okay? So we were talking about martial arts, and I was again talking about the spiritual dimension. Let's just say I'm going to do a form, okay? So I'm punching here, 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 whatever the movements, doesn't matter, whatever the movements, okay? Here. What's happening? If I go stop, 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 what happens? I'm balanced. I'm centered. Okay. Can we go through life every moment where we're balanced and centered? Yeah. Can we? What happens? The outside world is always changing. So in yoga, they put you in a posture, a yoga posture. Let's say some yoga posture, and they hold it there. And you're in a position of static balance. So, oh, I have to stay like this all my life and everything's fine. No, because things change around you, so you have to change. So the monks took these exercises to bring you so that your physical body, my bones, my muscles are aligned in a balanced way. And they teach you how to go from moment to moment to moment to moment in a balanced state. And then they said, okay, let's play a game. What happens if someone's trying to fight with you? Now I'm in this posture here, and the opponent's facing me. But he changes position, so suddenly I'm weak over here. What am I going to do? I'm going to smoothly move to another position. So they were using the form to teach you how to move from moment to moment with your mind, body, spirit connected, so that you're moving in a centered, powerful, flexible manner. And then against an opponent. And if you could do this and survive the lowest expression of human being, killing someone else, defending yourself, if you could do that and learn how to bounce from moment to moment, can I take those same skills and apply it to my everyday life? And that's where it became a way, a spiritual way. This is a modern interpretation of what I believe these traditional arts were doing. And I think it's very important today, when we talk about martial arts yesterday, today, and tomorrow, is to realize that for myself, after all these years, as I saw martial arts was the secret art that I go up the stairs in Chinatown to some smelly hall and practiced in secret, and it was very exciting, learning the secret killing ways. And to realize that it really was much, much more than this, much deeper. It was something very profound and something very spiritual, part of Chinese culture. And through martial arts journey, I got back into understanding my culture and heritage. And now that the films are so popular, and what I mean by the popular, you suddenly see, again, around the world in 80 days, and they have Kung Fu in that. Not just the martial art movies that has movies that they have Kung Fu, but suddenly Charlie's Angels, they're using Kung Fu. Suddenly, they had this Three Musketeers, and they're using Kung Fu techniques. You see, and people don't realize, because suddenly you're watching Hercules and Xena using these Kung Fu techniques, they begin to think that this is how the ancient Greeks fought. This is, again, a distortion. So it's fun now to watch how, again, that secret art that I cherish so much is now been proliferated, and it's permeated pop culture. But it's very important right now for the history, for this art to continue to grow and develop, so it becomes no longer secret art, but it becomes accessible. 5 minutes left. It becomes accessible to all of us, to modern day Westerners and Americans who may not be interested in Chinese philosophy. See, and this is what I'm trying to do these days. In addition to teaching people secret ways to kill, I'm also spending more of my time teaching people how to live healthy and peacefully. Does anybody have any questions? I had an outline, I didn't even follow the outline. I just went off. Does anybody have? Yes.
What motivated you to change from the comparative religions, that your background, to the martial arts?
Actually, to me, the comparative religion and martial arts were extensions of the same thing. Comparative religion basically is you're studying different religions of the world, different mythologies, different cultures have different ways of expressing what's it all about, what's the real truth. And as a person, I've always been drawn to trying to find out, why am I here, what's it all about. But at the same time, growing up as a Chinese American, as a minority when I was younger, it was right after World War II. There was a lot of prejudice. People call me Japanese or the enemy. And, you know, I was watching John Wayne movies. I was watching, you know, drinking Coca-Cola. I was doing the same thing other Americans was. But when we played soldiers, I had to be the guy shot out of the pillbox. But when it was time to play cowboys and Indian, I was always the Indian, you know. So I was brought up in that type of situation where I felt this, the effects of racism and being a minority in America. So it was very important for me, being this very sensitive little guy, to develop myself physically. And I wanted to really be able to take care of myself. So that was something that was really burning inside of me. And that's why I got attracted to Chinese martial arts, because I realized that there was a philosophical basis behind Chinese martial arts, that it wasn't just a sport to develop myself to become a great athlete, but it also had this underlying core that complemented my seeking for higher truths through religion. And when I said that there are many different systems of Kung Fu, many different styles, what I found was that the different styles of Kung Fu was almost like different religions. People became very, very protective and very proud of their particular system, and they would begin to fight other systems to say, my style is better than your style. You see, and this even occurred with the Buddhists amongst themselves, and among the Buddhists and Taoists. In Chinese novels, they would fight each other. So this is something very interesting also, you see. Now, in going deep into martial arts, very deep, I believe that the original impulse for it is something which is more than just the physical combative. I believe in something spiritual. Again, when I talk about religion, I'm not talking about any particular expression of it. I think organized religion sometimes gets us in more trouble because people are so believing in that religion so much. But that beyond the expression of it, is the real experience of the individual with something greater than he or she, and that we can tap into it. And I was able to tap into that and find it through the martial arts. But then, the concept of Tao. The way. This is the way of ultimate reality, the way of nature, the way of being. This is like a natural spiritual force in which energy moves. And this is Taoist thinking, and this has influenced even Zen Buddhism, this concept of Tao. I realized that in the end, martial arts, which was considered a way of life, the martial arts for me at one point was no longer the way, it was a way to the way. And this is what I'm trying, hopefully, to point the finger to martial artists and to other people. And again, to remove the religious connotation behind it and just get it back to something that's very simple, something that's in all of us. But whatever name you want to call it, doesn't matter, but you can tap in and use it. And just a quick moment, because we were talking about religion. In the Middle East, you have the three major religions: Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And they're about to blow up the whole damn world. And they pray to the same God. And they call it God by a different name. So as far as I'm concerned, for me, I'm not interested so much in religion. I'm concerned about the true spirit behind it. You see? And this is in my journey as a martial artist. People would say, this system is better than this system. Punch like this. This is superior. Punch like this is superior. You know, punch like this is superior. The snake is better, the crane is better. And people would spend their whole lives with the secrets of that method and saying, this is better, this is better. What I found that by studying deep into the martial arts, you realize no matter what the expression of it is, there's an underlying universality behind it. There's universal principles behind all the martial arts. And I could explain it scientifically if we had more time. But basically, for physical power, it is biomechanics. How to use the human body as efficiently as possible using Newton's laws of physics. That's all it is. And when you have some of these monks doing these tremendous supernatural techniques, most of it can be explained scientifically. See, most of it can be explained scientifically, but some of these things just seem to go against logic, and that's the power of it. We won't have time to do it all. Yes? Please. Okay. Yes?
You're a martial arts expert, right? You know a lot about all martial artists.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about Fu Sheng?
He was a very good martial art actor. Very good.
He couldn't fight no way.
No, he did, but he passed away in a car crash, but he was very good. He was very good. Yes.
Can you compare from the traditional Chinese point of view and the contemporary point of view the difference between this, the heaven, earth, and man
Yes.
versus the heaven, earth, and woman?
Okay, I'm sorry. When we say man in the Chinese character, actually,
I understand.
man means human. It doesn't refer
But
to...
traditionally, when you study, there are difficulties nowadays and before. If you're a woman and you want to study in the Buddhist temple,
Yeah.
right? Can you address that?
Address that?
Do you think it's better?
Basically, those old traditions, it was a patriarchal society. Exactly. Women were not really, they weren't number one.
But do you think it's possible to
Change?
The West happened to Kung Fu. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
What's happening now? Pure strength. Men are physically stronger than women, the way they're built. But women are strong in other ways, that they bear children, and that women are much tougher than guys ultimately. Figure that one out. You know, guys don't know it yet, but they're figuring it out. I'm sorry, I don't know if I answered your question properly, because I'm still not sure.
I'm just wondering if it was possible to study if you're in 400 years ago.
Yeah.
You're female. How far do you think you can go? Realistically.
Realistically, it would probably be more difficult because it was a boys' club. Basically, it was developed by the monks. They do have, let's say, Wing Chun is one system that was attributed to a nun, according to legend. But basically, if you were a monk, generally there were more monks probably than nuns. So it was very male-oriented.
How about now?
It's changing. It's changing, just like they have many more women bodybuilders. More and more women are coming out. And right now, if you look at media, all of the new actresses are studying martial arts, and it's becoming part of the culture. In fact, actually, in my son's school, I'm actually watching in the playground these girls, they're kicking and punching the guys, where when they didn't have that when I was young. You know, so I'm saying that there is this change that is occurring because of these films. And in many ways it is empowering women.
Is it profound level or superficial level, in your opinion? I know.
I don't know. I can't answer
You like
that.
the old movies or the new Kung Fu movies? You like
sorry?
the old martial arts?
What about them?
Or the new one today? Which
Do
one
I
do you
prefer?
Yeah.
I like to go back to man against man without the trampolines and without the wire work. That's what I like, personally. Yes.
I think the young lady, I think she's driving that we are all, we cannot correct the history. The old development, you know, the martial art, whatever developed, is in the circumstance of the historical framework.
Yeah.
You cannot correct. But because of the human knowledge, equality gradually forming to the train of equality, and gradually, as you indicate, there's more and more girls struggling, trying to correct that
Yes.
historical inequality. I think gradually, I think because you no matter 400 years ago, 500 years ago, the master, they live under the influence of the formal master of the bias. You cannot correct. So I think, gradually, I think the trend is going to equality developing, the equal democracy and the cultural equality development. I think this is a trend. That's not incomparable, as you said, a woman better, man's better, other than just the Margaret Mead said. Other than woman give birth to a child, man, woman are equal.
That's right.
That's
right. I think, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I believe the 21st century is the century of the reemergence of the goddess. That means the feminine energy, I believe, is getting much stronger. And I believe, I'm talking about historically speaking, I think it is important because if we don't, using the traditional patriarchal masculine way of solving the problems, we're going to destroy ourselves. So it is an importance for us to awaken to that feminine force, not just the masculine force. So I don't know if I'm addressing what you're saying, but it's very important. Again, you see, in Shaolin Temple, they have this salutation here. This is a salutation. And in Chinese, the right hand is no more chalk. No more chalk. Yeah, got it. Okay. The right hand, the fist, is Ru, which means the sun or day. Okay. And this hand is the moon. Yeah. The sun and the moon, the opposites, the masculine and feminine force, positive and negative. And when you bring these two characters together, you have the term Ming, which means bright. Okay. So every time I do this movement here, I'm symbolically expressing a philosophical concept. I'm not using words and language and sound. I'm using the most primal language, is the language of the body, to express it. Because this is the balance. And the whole art is to balance this. Now, before I go, I'm sorry. You want to give me 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
I'll keep going. I can go on forever, so I've already passed my time. As I said, I addressed how the martial arts have changed and how they had this concept of the triad. This is something pretty interesting. If in Chinese, in the Shaolin tradition, the Manchurians, which were the northern barbarians, or the Qings, had invaded the Ming dynasty, and they overthrew the Ming government, which was in power for about 300 years. Okay. And when they took over, many of the generals and people, they fled and they hid in the temples. But why did they hid in the temples? Because according to Buddhism, when you become a monk, you shave your head, you give up your family life, and you just go off, become a nameless monk and seeking enlightenment. So many of these warriors went to the temples just to hide so they wouldn't get killed. But while they was in the Shaolin Temple, they trained in martial arts so that they could develop the power, so that they could teach others, so that they could fight the invading Manchurians. They would give each other this hand signal, which meant Fan Qing Fu Ming, to oppose the Qing dynasty and restore the Ming dynasty. This was the original meaning. Okay, so it became a political meaning. Now, according to legend, the temple was actually burnt down. It was called the burning of the Shaolin, because the Qing and Manchus realized that they had people hidden in there, that they had patriarchs in there. So they sent thousands of government troops and they just wiped them out. And according to legend, some monks escaped, and 5 monks escaped. And they were called the 5 ancestors. You saw the movies, right? Okay. I saw the movie too. I don't know this stuff. I'm just telling all the movies and comic books that I learned. I'm faking it. Okay. They burnt down the Shaolin, or Shaolin. 5 monks escaped, and these monks got together, and it was called the Red Pavilion, and they made a vow. They said, we were not born on the same day, we were not born in the same year, but we all swear that we're going to die in the same day, same year. And then what they agreed that they're going to begin to teach Shaolin Kung Fu to the masses, where it was a secret art before. And it was called the Tian Di Hui, the Fuxiang movies, when they're doing all that.
Yeah.
This guy knows more Chinese. He did PhD in Kung Fu, okay? They had this organization called the Tian Di Hui, Tian, Heaven, Di, Earth Society. And they, at that point, was a historical point when they began to teach what was secret fighting arts to farmers and the peasants so they could find Xing Fu Men. In my opinion, where most people feel that's the beginning of the spreading and the proliferation of Shaolin Kung Fu, in my opinion, that was the beginning of the deterioration of the real meaning of it. Because prior to that, Tian Di Ren was a philosophical, spiritual concept that these people were studying and learning to develop the powers, and they were not theoretically, ideally not interested in worldly ambition, you know, getting on Donald Trump's TV show. They weren't interested. Okay, they were forsaken. So by teaching the masses, and this is all these different systems that we see today, they address the Buddhist aspect, but actually these are fighting arts. Okay, to me that is the beginning of the deterioration of the real meaning of Shaolin. Many people obviously feel that's when all these other styles developed, but that the concept of triad changed from a philosophical concept to a political symbol. This was once balancing of opposite. You will find harmony by learning how to balance the opposite forces in yourself. By balancing the good in yourself and the evil in yourself, by the positive, negative, the masculine, feminine, whatever it is, balance. Learn how to do that. Now all of a sudden it's a Fan Xing Fu Ming. So it changed from political, it changed to a political intention. However, for 300 years, they never overthrew the Qings. So what happens when you have a secret organization, even though it's patriotic and it's underground, what happens?
It grows.
Huh?
It grows.
It continues to grow, but it became a criminal organization. And it became what we call the triads today. So when you see all these Hollywood movies and all these triad guys, when they have their secret ceremony, they're showing respect to the 5 Shaolin ancestors. What happened, you had these patriarchal organizations, but let's say your grandfather was very patriotic and he wanted to overthrow the Qings, and you know, it's 40 years later, generations later, and you don't care, you want to have a good time. So you say, hey, let's use the secret organization to make some money. So gambling, prostitution, drugs, whatever it was. And that's how it came down today. So that's why when I named my system, I had called my name, the system, originally I was using a philosophical concept for my system, so I wanted to call it the Way of the Triad. But every time I use that with Chinese, especially from Hong Kong, they would shudder. So I meant the Way of the Triad, the Way of Heaven, Earth, and Man, but to them they would hear the Way of the Mafia. So I'm teaching. So I scratched that title for my system. Okay. So just as an aside, you see, in Chinese philosophy we talk about change. Everything has a beginning, middle, and end. The flower, the seed grows, it flowers, and then it dies. You see, we have this. That's the cycle of life. Okay? We're busy trying to fight it, but you can't. See? this concept of the triad, even this concept of triad has gone through the changes. It started as a pure philosophical, spiritual concept. It became political, and it became criminal. See? And it's my hope that here, next millennium, third millennium, that it's going to be reborn and flower into the original meaning. So that more and more people, both East and West, everywhere, just picks up that whole idea of learning how to protect yourself. And how do you protect yourself? Not just by fighting, but by learning how to cultivate yourself through awareness of who you are as a physical being. How to take care of your body, how to exercise, and how to take care of your mind, how to think creatively, how to think critically, and how to control the emotions. That's a tough one. I thought it used to be that spirituality was the hardest thing. It's the emotions is hard, because I know we're a lot of spiritual people, when it comes to emotions, it falls apart. But anyway, this is a journey. It's a journey, and we're all going through it. And we've just, 9/11 was a horrible time. It was a wake-up call for a lot of people. A lot of us fell back asleep. But that was showing the catastrophe human beings can do to each other. And now the tsunami shows it wasn't human, it's nature. And how that catastrophe could happen. And so we know at all this, life is very fragile. And it's very precious. So martial arts, the way of Zen, was about life and death. But not just against the opponent, but just life and death every moment, and to be able to appreciate it, to be truly alive and aware. And I think that, in essence, was what they were seeking, the original warrior monks of the Shaolin. And this is what Kung Fu is all about. Okay? Thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, I'm here. But oh, I'm sorry. Can I put my, in case people are interested, I'm going to put my web. If people are interested in contacting me, this is my web. And you might not have things right away because we're fixing up, but please keep in touch with me. And I appreciate any letters, encouragements, checks.
Just curious, in terms, so do you hold workshops or do you teach at like university about this, or how, what do you do?
Right now what I'm doing is I'm beginning a series of lectures on health and wellness, teaching balance, teaching these movements of Tai Chi and Qigong. So if you go on, you'll see eventually we're setting up some lecture series. And maybe with Professor Pam we can develop some things here. We're just looking at that. And then I'm also developing a program called Dragon Kids, and it's life skills through martial arts for parents and children. And this is what Tony Josephson and I have developed. And it's using martial arts really just to teach people what we need just to survive in life, and techniques to reduce stress, how to breathe. And then I'm doing another course called the Evolving Martial Artist, for martial artists who are concerned about going deeper into the martial arts. So I'm doing this thing called the Evolving Martial Artist. And it's open to all stylists. Anybody who really wants to go to the next stage and you're a sincere seeker in the martial arts, I'm also having that. So please go on the website. It might not be set up, but probably in a week or so. Just check out and you can contact me. Thank you very much. You have some questions?